then we can bring that back. Perfect. We'll come back and finish up the magical trees, and you'll all see what I'm talking about, how you get a tree from a lot of color. Does that sound interesting? Okay, so the way that I work, I'm going to...
Yes, what kind of brush should we start with?
It's up to you. When I get over there and show you what we're going to do, the first exercise is going to be putting a lot of paint down on a piece of paper. So a bigger brush is more helpful, but it doesn't matter. You can use a small brush. It'll just take more strokes. But I'm going to leave this chair. I'm going to put you on screen share, and I will let you see my camera that's sitting right down on top of my paper. My mic is still on. My earphones are still on. I would say there's no reason to mute yourself unless you want to, because I really like it when people have questions. The problem with a 2-hour workshop is I have a tendency to talk a lot and explain. I've developed this way of explaining what I'm going to do and why I'm going to do it, because after painting virtually a few times, I had a lot of students say, they'd be yelling, whoa, 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 why did you do that? Why did you just do what you did? So I've developed a way of trying to let you know what I'm going to do and why I'm going to do it, and then you can watch me do it. But there's a constant communication. So it doesn't bother me at all to have you ask questions as I'm painting. So you can mute if you want. I don't demand it of you. Just simply blurt out a question and ask me while I'm painting. Go ahead, Judy.
Can you just give us 1 minute to grab a paper and pen so that we can write down a couple of these gems?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Sure. And of course, I did a list of things for Maya, and of course, I discovered a few things that I probably should have said and I didn't, but they're things like pencils that I hope people have easy access to. So there was nothing earth-shattering that would make people go, oh, I can't do this because I didn't get that. This is minor stuff. So just perfect. As a show of hands, how many of you are artists, are painters that paint or have painted in the past? One. Now I'm not, but when I use the term artist, I'm talking about any painting of any kind at any level makes you an artist. So if you've painted somewhere, sometime, you're an artist in my book. There's no stipulations. Okay, good. I'm going to be painting, I recommended 3 colors. If you have more than 3 colors, be my guest to use any color, any colors you want. I like to start with 3 colors because it teaches people how the primary color system works. And I'm a believer of mixing my colors as opposed to using them out of the tube. To me, especially in trees, the green out of a tube is a green color you would probably never see in a tree unless it was an artificial tree. Most greens are not greens. They're brownish greens or grayish greens or reddish greens. So use whatever colors you have. Anyways, I'm going to go over to my desk. You will still hear me. You can still talk to me, but you will be seeing the paper that I'm going to work on. I'll show you brushes. I'll show you my palette, and you'll be able to see when I mix paint, I'll show you how I'm doing that. So again, we're going to start with the preliminary part of the magical tree, and then we're going to put that away to dry. And just so you know, if at home you want to do this, I have a hair dryer right here on my desk. So if I do this by myself, I would use a hair dryer, but I didn't require that of anyone. So I came up with this workaround, which is we'll paint, we'll put that one aside, we'll paint some trees, and we'll come back and finish that up. That'll be the 2 hours. And the 2 hours go by quite quickly. You'll be amazed. Okay, so hang on just a second. I'm going to put on share. Okay, got it. Share screen. This is what my desktop looks like. Can everybody see that? Okay,
Yep.
so I'm heading over to my other chair, which is about 3-4 feet away. So I'm over here now. I've got a piece of paper. We're going to start the magical tree. This is extra. So I have so many brushes. I keep rubber bands around them. This is what happens when you start to accumulate brushes as an artist. And this is just a part. So these are fine line brushes. These are square brushes. These are round brushes. These are what they call fan brushes. And I have made a bunch of handmade, I'm hoping you can see, let's see that. You notice how the end of that thing is very irregular? I made that by taking one of those dollar brushes from the hardware store and just cutting the end to be irregular because I wanted to be able to get irregular shapes. So let's start with the magical tree. And this is the one where we're not thinking about trees. We're not thinking about tree shapes. We're just thinking about putting color on a piece of paper. And I'm not going to wet my paper first because I think it doesn't matter to me. If you want to, please go ahead. I'm not going to do it because I'm going to try to make sure my painting dries a bit by the time I finish it. So I'm going to take just a medium-sized square brush, and I'm going to use light paint. So if you've got red, yellow, and blue, I'm going to be using the reds and the yellows. If I use any other colors like greens, they'll be on the light side. So my palette is going to be light. You can do it either way, but when we end up doing negative painting, you're either going to use a dark color or a light color. In watercolor, it's much easier to do darks as a background. But I may do 2 of these quickly and show you what it looks like with a white background, what it looks like with a black background. Does that make sense? I've got my water in a crazy little bucket that I found in an art store. And it's got, the reason that it's divided is that I always want one to be clean water. The other 2 is where I wash my brush. But if you keep washing your brush and using that only, all your paint will start to discolor. So I use the one to clean, and then I use one to get new water. And my palette is not, this is the squeeze tube paints, but they live in here on their own. I just squirt them when I get ready to paint. About an hour or so ago, I spray them like this and it wets them all up. It's just quicker to get them loosened up. And I've got a sheet of paper, a brush. I wet my brush with clean water. So if you have new brushes, it may take a little bit to get them wet. Oftentimes they have an additive in the hairs sometimes that when you dip it into water, it doesn't fully absorb. So sometimes if it's a new brush, it needs to sit in water for a couple of minutes. So don't worry if it's not working perfectly, if you've never used it. And I'll start with what I'll do here. I'll show you. I'm gonna mix the primary colors. And again, you don't have to do this. So I've got a classic cadmium red. And I'll mix a nice Hansa yellow over here. And then I'll mix a nice ultramarine blue over here. I'm probably not going to use too much of the blue, but I may. Let's see what we get. Okay, so now I've got my primary colors out there. Again, you don't have to follow this because all I'm going to do is do some interesting marks on the page. That's really all I'm after. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I'm going to do this. I'm even going to leave some white in there. I'm going to put some yellow. I might put a little blue. That kind of blue mixed to kind of made a green brown, but that's okay too. Okay. So there's paint on there. Now I'm going to get a little bit more bold. I also have some paper towels that I keep nearby. Every now and then I'd like to dry my brush because it gets too much paint on it. And I want some yellow now, a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go right into the okay. Now I'm going to get a smaller brush because it's wet, and I'm going to try to throw some darks and lights with a little more interest in there. Put lights in the darks and the darks and the lights and the yellows and the reds and the yellows. I'm just trying to make this fun, and you will see why later. This is why it's magical. And you can see what happens around here when some of the paint gets mixed in with some of the other paints. They blend on their own. I'm going to go for a little of that. And I might even do some of this. So I'm just doing this to get interesting colors and interesting shapes. That's the only thing I'm after here. Not trying to draw a leaf or a tree or get any specific
Should we do this along with you or just watch?
either way. I'd be happy. Go ahead and do it. Don't do what I'm doing necessarily. You just get some color on a page, and then
John,
we'll
I just have a
see.
question. You
Yes.
seem to be using your red more on the upper right side. And is there, like, as you're doing the colors, is there a balance you're trying to aim for rather than just like splotch colors?
No, what I'm trying to do is make everything asymmetric rather than symmetric. In other words, I want a collection of different shapes and sizes and colors. That's what I'm after. So otherwise, I'd end up with like a wallpaper pattern, and I'm not after that. So
So
right
you're-
now, I'm just kind of mixing and matches, and I'm only using 3 colors. Remember, I'm not doing a whole bunch of colors. But there's no thinking behind what I'm doing with anything. All I'm trying to do is keep things. And then what I might do to make it interesting is just keep it interesting. And by interesting, that means there should be darks and mediums and lights, and there should be big and medium and small amounts. I'm also going to take a credit card, and I'm going to throw some lines in here, because trees have lines in them. Now I am going at an angle. That's intentional, but I just think.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, if you were doing anything intentional, because it seems like you were intentionally making it asymmetric, and now intentionally on an angle. Okay.
Yes, yes, yeah. Now, to me, that's pretty interesting. It isn't anything, but it's an interesting mix of colors. There's like, it looks like predominantly yellow, secondary red, and a little bit of the blue in there, which made green. That's what my eye is seeing. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, so while everybody's finishing that, I'm going to do a quick one in darker colors because I consider these to be bright light colors. And I'm going to do one that are more in the blues. So these are the ones that were
Do you find for watercolor brushes, because I haven't pulled out my stuff in so many years, there's natural bristle and then there's I don't know, synthetic.
synthetic.
Do you have a preference?
You know, what I've learned about brushes is it's all your own particular feel. I can tell you this, that the better the brush is, the more you pay for it, the more things you can do with it. So if you're looking to spend very little, you're going to end up with cheap brushes, which are harder to use. A better brush, the hair holds a lot of water. This particular brush, let's see if you can see it. One of the unique things about an expensive brush is, can you see how thick that is when I load it with water? Because a lot of brushes, when you load them with water, are the same thickness as they were. This kind of brush, I can cover a whole sheet of paper with a good brush. So synthetic is really caught up to natural. It's not a matter of synthetic or not, it's a matter of quality. So if you're starting, I wouldn't spend a lot of money, but when you start painting and you like it, I would spend more money to get a better brush. That's more, to me, more important than whether it's synthetic or natural. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'm going back to. These are darker.
And is the concept to really have very little or no white showing?
Yeah, I'm going to try to leave a little bit, but not much, and you'll see why later. But yes, that's exactly what I'm attempting to do, is to leave very little. When between the beginning and ending of this magical tree, we're going to be talking about painting trees, and one of the things that I am a big proponent of is leaving whites when you paint the tree, because most trees have a whole bunch of air holes in them, and the tendency is to just cover up all the holes, and the tree can look really flat. I'm also going to tilt this thing and see. Oh, see, I get some nice. I like it when things happen here that are kind of accidental. I'm just turning my sheet where the paper's wet and letting it run, as I think it'll be interesting. Okay, one more thing here, and I think I'll call it quits here. But I wanted one dark and one light, and I'll show you why later. Okay, so I've got images that are going to be drying off to the side. And then we will continue and finish up that exercise on the magical trees. Now, let's talk about regular trees. Is everybody at a good point to move on, or do you want more time to finish up?
I'm ready.
Ready?
Okay.
I'm ready.
Sounds good. So there's 2 or 3 things I wanted to, I'm going to write them down so you don't forget. At least 3 things about trees that you need to keep in mind when you paint them.
Do we need to
Number
have
1,
both-
go ahead. What's our question?
do you need to have both the dark and the light ones?
No, you don't. No.
And does the whole page need to be colored?
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
It doesn't have, you can cover it if you want. If not, it won't make any difference at all. Okay, so basic principles when painting trees. And I was going to write these down so you would remember them, because these I think are important. When you're painting trees, rule number 1 is to not think about the details of a tree. And what do I mean by that? What it means is,
You guys just started?
I'm on camera right now. Anyways, no details. What happens in our brain is when we see a tree, we think right away of leaves and branches. And you have to get that out of your mind, because that's not what you want to think of first. What you want to think of first on a tree is the shape of the tree, basically, because a pine tree is a different shape than an apple tree, and a cypress tree is a different shape than another tree. That's what's critical. You don't worry about details till you finish a picture, and then you have a choice to make whether you want it to be a super detailed picture where you go in and paint the leaves, or whether you want to just indicate what leaves might look like. So number 1, never think about details, just think about shapes. Number 2 is the source of the direction of the sun is really important when you're painting trees. If you need to know if the sun's coming from the left or from the right. Now, if you're painting from your head, you decide which way you want it to go. If you're looking at a photo, check and see where's the light side of the tree and a dark side of the tree. If you're painting outside, looking at nature, it'll be clear to you, although it changes constantly. So a shadow that you have at noon is going to be different at 3. So you have to be careful. You may have heard that when plein air painters really would choose an early morning or late afternoon to paint because the shadows are better. They're kind of different directions, but when you paint in the middle of the day, the sun is coming straight down, and it's not as interesting as if it's to the left or the right. So when I'm painting watercolors, I'll often put a pencil mark, or on my tape, I'll put an arrow mark that reminds me the sun is over here. So all my shadows are going to have to be on the opposite side. I've got a trunk later, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important, no details, the sun direction, and then it's a matter of shapes and values. So what makes up the content of a tree are the highlights, the medium tones, and the dark values. And we'll get into that when I do the tree. And last, it's just a good thing to remember that trees have air holes. Some people call them bird holes. The sky can be seen behind them. So when you paint a tree, I'll show you while I'm talking, I'll show you what I'm talking about. When you're painting a tree, if you paint the tree with no, I'm just doing a random Let's say this is my tree here. There. Now, you can't see that. I didn't leave any white, which means the tree looks flat. It doesn't look like there's any air that's going through it. That's the problem with doing trees without white. And I can add, while this is wet, I can add darks to it to get my shadows in. I can do all sorts of things, but there's no whites in there and it makes it look less like a tree. So when I paint trees, I try for a couple of things. One is I try for asymmetric, A-S-Y-M-E-T-R-I-C, asymmetric shapes. It's rare that a tree is going to be perfectly round. That, I mean, yes, you can see it in a landscaped yard, but that's not the way trees usually grow. Trees grow asymmetrical, and I will describe that to you and show what I mean. If I turn my brush to the side and paint, look what happens. The brush strokes and the color come very spontaneously. I'm not controlling everything. There's little edges and ridges, and I mentioned these brushes that I cut myself. Can you see the crazy things? If I put those in paints, get some paint on those tips that have weird shapes, I can get some really unique, I don't know if you can see that close up. Notice how irregular that is. That's more like nature. And if you paint and leave air, when you paint different parts, then it even looks more realistic. So when I go through some of these tree demonstrations, I'm going to be showing you how I work with the direction of the sun, the shadows, the values, and then doing it as asymmetrical as I can. So let's understand, we understand a little bit about what I'm attempting to do. The other thing is that I mentioned to you, I'm not a believer of using a green right out of the tube. I just don't think most trees in nature look that way. This is a green right out of the tube. And it's not as bright on the screen as it is on my paper, but that's just not what trees look like. So I choose to mix my greens. I don't use greens out of, or if I use that green, I will mix something in with it to change that. So I'm going to do a few trees down here. I'm going to put these principles into action. I'm going to have sun coming from the left, which means the highlights will be on the left side of the tree and the right side and the bottom will be darker. But I'm going to have three different shapes of trees. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to start with my lights. It's always better to start with light colors and put the darks on top because it's watercolors. And once you get dark, it's going to stay dark. So if you start with light, then you can put dark on top of it or medium on top of it. So if I'm going to do a random shaped tree over here, and I'm going to use a technique where I'm not covering up every inch. Does that show up? That's how I would start a tree because it's very asymmetrical. I've got light colors. The highlights are over here. So I'm going to come in and put darks, mediums, and then I'll put darks. So I add a little blue to that color that I just used. And I'll end up with some darker shapes. And then, while it's still kind of wet, I will add a little more blue. And add a little more depth. There we go. And then sometimes if you get a chunk that looks a little too dark, I just get a wet brush with no color on it and just try to kind of tone it down a bit. It's always nice to have a little bit a darker area in a few places, but that was a bit too dark. And then I'll work on another one in the middle, a different shape and a different style. And I might, on this one, I probably will change the colors up. So when I'm in my palette and I've used all these colors for this one, I will usually take and clean it out to start another one, just so that it's not the exact same color. I just clean that out and I'll go back in and I'm going to adjust the colors on this one and maybe make it a more brownish green. So we'll take a little of the red with a little of the that looks, there's a brownish green kind of. And this might be a browner green. Let's get a little darker down there. And then this last tree, and these colors, I'm not trying to represent nature. I'm trying to make them interesting. So in this case, I think I'll do a tree that's kind of out of character, but maybe a possibility. This tree, let's lighten it up a bit. This tree might be the airiest of all the trees, meaning this one's going to be connected by branches. It's still going to have shadow. But I'll stop there for a second. So I'm going to just take a smaller brush now, because I wanted to kind of need to make a brown. This one's got, as this dries, I can actually get more detail down there to finish it up. But I'm just kind of showing you how these might. Going in, adding few little extra dark areas just to kind of finish this shading stuff off. I'm just turning my brush sideways. Again, I want the shadows on the bottom and the right more than on the left. That's kind of the goal on this thing. And then as it dries, you can put more little details into the, you can add shadows to the tree trunks, and you can add shadows to the trees, and more branches to things. And even with a small enough brush, you can even add, they put out there, little, almost like leaves. If you were to come out here and put little things outside the tree that look like leaves.
Can you one more time say, so if the light is coming from the left, like your arrow,
Yes.
should be on your right? Is that what you said?
If the sun is coming from my
Yeah.
left, the highlights should be on the left, the dark should be on the right
The
and the
right.
bottom.
Right.
Yeah. So in all these cases, the darks are here and on the bottom. And then if, the darks are right underneath the tree, there's always, when you go back in to do little details, right underneath the tree, it's usually a dark shadow covering up but you can go back in later and you can add all sorts of details, branches and twigs, and in some cases it's adding parts of the tree trunk through the tree. But I always also, it's nice to do this routinely, is put a shadow so you remember the shadow's going to go a certain direction.
John, are you using Payne's gray?
No, I'm not. These are all made up of blues and reds, kind of three same basic colors. They just look like gray, that if you mix red, blue, and yellow in the right amounts, they end up being gray. Now I've got a little bit darker paint. I'm just kind of adding, I'm going back into some of these with a little teeny brush to add just little dark areas to kind of finish the painting. And again, I'm not trying to do any great detail. I'm just trying to accentuate. And these, you know, this kind of painting, all these underneaths would be darker than the tops. So I could go back in like that, you know, you'll get the idea. And these are all out of my head. I'm not looking at anything for reference. So there we go. So it doesn't matter what the colors are, but these trees with the air and the values, varying values, just get more interesting than if it's just a big blob of color. And the greens get more interesting if they're not that bright green that comes right out of the can. So the other thing I wanted to try here for you guys, and I have, this will still work. I have more paper on the back of my palette. I'm going to turn this over and do another one. And I'm going to show you how to use some texture. Now, what I've got here is a piece of saran wrap. And the reason I'm using saran wrap is I don't want anything that will absorb the paint. I just want to lift it off my palette and plunk it on here in a tree shape. And this is all kind of experimental. You're never sure what's going to happen. But if I used paper towel, it would absorb the paint. I don't think much would get on my paper. So I've done this with cellophane. You can do it with tin foil, even you
Bubble
can even
wrap.
use bubble wrap. Yeah, that's another one. You can use a sponge. And the same thing, the trouble is it starts to absorb. This side back here, it might not. I'll try some with that and see what happens. But what I want to do is see if I can get a very asymmetrical texture going on when I put this down. And I'll mix some yellows and blues, but I'll leave them kind of that, you called it Payne's gray. I leave some of that out there, and I'll put some yellow in it, and I'll put some more of my ultramarine blue in there, kind of a brown color. I think if I put enough blue, it'll turn back to, it's kind of a brown, and then maybe another shot of yellow. I'll see if I can get a greenish color out of that. Yep. And it's kind of a, okay. Now, let's see what happens. This is just randomly folded. I don't want anything. I don't want a real perfect pattern. I want spontaneous. Oh, and now I'm twisting it and turning it. That's even better. Yeah, this gives you kind of a nice, this is a good way of getting a very asymmetric look, because sometimes with our brushes, we have a tendency to get it to go way too perfect. And I just like what's happening with all the this is hard. This kind of texture is hard to get with a brush. Even if I use one of these crazy, I can get kind of a linear, you know, lines going out here, which are all part of trees too. I could add some of that to it. So it's kind of like, That's an interesting one. Now, I'm going to try the same thing, but I'm going to put a little different color and see if I can get another tree to work. Let's try the sponge this time. Sponges sometimes end up a little, see, I think it was absorbing too much. Let's try this. Yeah, sponge just absorb too much, so I'm gonna kind of, now if we combine that with what a brush can do, it's kind of almost a dry brush technique. You want enough.
Is the sun coming from the top left with this too?
Same one, I'm just keeping down. So I'm kind of working down on the bottom rights of all these things to just kind of darken and make them interesting. And as abstract as these are, when you do this to them, they start looking like trees. And I'm just, I'm adding a little some points of interest. You could start the trunk up above there too. In this tree, I'll have the trunk going up that way. And then coming down. This tree needs a little reshaping at the top. So I'm going to take the side of my brush and put kind of a proper top on it there. Now it looks a little more tree-like. And there are times if you hit the paint at just the right wetness, you can scrape out branches. There's some. And you see some of those little branches that I scratched into the tree? Now, there's a couple of other ways of doing trees, and I'll put one in here. And what I'm going to do on this one that makes it unique is I'm not going to use paint right away. I'm going to put water down, and then I'm just going to drop paint into that water. So I'm going to come up with a shape that's not unlike these other trees, but it's just clear water, and you can see it at an angle. There's shiny water. That's what my eye sees. Now I'm going to take some of my greens right from my palette. I'm going to start dropping them in here. And they kind of mix on their own. And then I'll kind of darken that up as I get down below. But it's real. And then where the highlights are, I'll drop some of the brighter top left part of the tree. Now, because I hit it all with water, I don't have all the air holes, but I can add that in later as I finish it up. I can do darks around those, and the air holes will be not as white, but they'll be there. But that's another way of building a tree. And then as it dries, you mix paint a little thicker and a little thicker, and you can paint right over the top of that. Let's see. You can start to see. And then there's always a technique of removing paint. If you take and wet your brush, clean the paint out and pull the water out, it now becomes a receptacle from wet paint to pull paint from your paper. So when you hit it, it'll pull it off and leave it kind of white. So that's kind of use that in doing clouds a lot. You paint down, then you pull some of it off. And then we start that's another brush that I like to use when I do paintings. Trees is a fan brush. It can be an interesting. This is a fan brush, got a bunch of little, and this is kind of this is more of an acrylic brush. This one's got stiffer things, which means I can get some real interesting things going on here. Get it a little wetter. If I darken this up to a little bit of a brown, maybe what happens on this tree. It's like a set of trees. Okay, so this tree is less successful than the other trees, but it still looks like trees. A little gray. Gonna put a little dark at the bottom of the tree. Okay. So I'm thinking you are getting the tree parts. Any other questions? Slow, easy colors aren't critical. You can make up your own colors for trees. They don't have to follow a what's your seed. If you want to make a tree, I'm going to do one that just might be interesting.
So.
So this is my own
He didn't prepare us.
rendition of color here. These are not trees that I would see in nature.
I'm just doing, I'm just doing whatever.
Those things.
What?
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
Protein would you like for supper?
What are my options?
Well, there's chicken, there's
Okay.
hamburger meat again. There's cheese, beans. I bought a halloumi cheese.
Maybe whoever's discussing dinner, you might want to mute yourself.
Okay, so you could see, even if I use colors out of my head, they still are going to look like trees. They still have the same. These don't have as much that the spunky detail that those have, but they look like trees and they're interesting. That's what makes them, I think, magical or interesting. Okay. So much for the tree studies. Any more questions? I'm going to go back to my magical trees in a minute. But is there any questions about doing trees and tricks and techniques and approaches? No? Okay. So I'm going to go back to my, I'll let everybody catch up and hit a point. This is pretty much dried. I'm going to just ensure I mentioned to you that I was going to be using negative painting. Let me give you an example of what negative painting is. Let's see if I can pull this off in front of your eyes. If I were to take a color, just a random color, and I wanted to here, this will make it easy. You'll know what it is. So watch this. Does everybody recognize this shape?
Yes, pear.
So what I did was I painted everything that wasn't a pear, and that's what I ended up with. So I'm going to take my trees, magical trees, and I'm going to paint around these. Oh, look what happened down here. I got paint from the back side, which isn't going to make any difference at all, except it's gonna might run in my paint. So I'll just, look at that, not a problem at all. Okay. So I'm going to use a dark color, and darks meaning the blue that I used, blue and the red. I'm going to get a color that's kind of dark enough to paint over these colors. So I have to kind of super saturate it with pigment to get it dark enough, because it's got to hide some of this stuff. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do as I'm doing it. So I'm getting a nice dark purple here. Okay, and here's what I'm going to do. I am going to paint this into a forest of trees. Here goes. Okay, does everybody see what's happening over here? Is it hitting your eyes yet? My trees versus my non-trees?
Hey, John, I wanted to say I gotta go, but thank you so much for all these wonderful classes. You're amazing. I love every minute of it. So
Wonderful. Thanks for coming by, Marla. Good to see you.
happy New Year. We'll see you when class starts again. Thank you. I love all
Okay.
your magic trees.
So
Bye.
this is what a magical tree looks like. With dark backgrounds. And I can dry this up a little bit more. Almost tempted. It's too, sometimes it gets too. There. Now, some of my tree trunks didn't come out so well. And I have options for that, but I'm not sure I'm going to work on that right now. I have in this palette over here some gouache. Gouache is watercolor, but it's more opaque than the standard transparent watercolor. And sometimes if my tree trunks don't end up that perfect,
Yeah.
I would be tempted to hit it with a little bit of this gouache. Let's see how this works. Now, see, some of these little ones look actually better when they're done. Kind of spontaneous trunks as opposed to what I'm doing now, but this will help define the tree part. Now, can everybody see that?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm doing some sprinkles and splatters just to make it look more interesting. So it doesn't look too flat. Now, the reason that I wanted to do two of them was because I wanted to see if we might be able to do a white background around this one. So I'm going to do a white background, but I want to dry this. I think I'll use a bigger brush. A bigger square brush, maybe like this.
How do you spell gouache, John?
Gouach, gouache. It's watercolor, but it is opaque. It's more opaque than regular watercolors. It isn't perfectly opaque. If you try to cover a watercolor with this, it may not cover 100%, but it is more opaque than a typical watercolor out of a tube. So it's a very interesting medium. It's still water-based. It's closer to acrylic and oils in that, you know, white can go over dark, and in watercolors, you're kind of stuck with the colors you put on the first time. So it's just interesting to play with. I have a set here that I keep around. I use it if I want to do touch up for something. If a particular painting didn't work and I want to paint around something, I've got the option to try it, see if it works. It's also kind of nice because it sometimes can give you a real interesting, you can see through it. So it's kind of a nice, not a pure, not always a real pure white. And that's sometimes kind of interesting. It's, it can be an off-white, and that works sometimes. I can go back maybe, and I'll see if I can do it to this one. Sometimes I can add a yellow to part of this to make it look like it's sun is in the sky or something, you know, it's. I'll try some up in the top, but I'll show you what's happening up there now. I painted it white, but it's, you can see that it's, see if I can get some light on it. It's, you can see through it. So I'm gonna add a little yellow, because when you add yellow to that, it's gonna look like the sun is shining up there. So I'm gonna see if I can cover up some of that. When you do this negative painting, you kind of have to do one pass and then check it out, because I looked at the first pass and it wasn't cutting it, so it's probably have to let this dry overnight to see how it looks tomorrow to know if it's finished or not.
So would you ever go back in and add more texture to the trees?
I might. Yes. Now that I look at it, and yeah, I think this is one of those where, you know, a couple things could happen. I could do this, which is white, which would be probably interesting. And then I can add colors too. Yellow or, yeah. And then dark. It would get interesting, get more interesting.
Looks like a
Let's just
winter
see.
wonderland.
Yeah, it could be any, you know, it could, let's add some red, and if you go into the darks with some red, it just starts to look more interesting. Darker darks, maybe down here in the shadows.
Could you explain how you get the sprinkles? Because
I've got a brush with a longer tip than normal. If you look for brushes that have long bits of hair, see how long some of these bristles are? They come in a category of brushes called liner brushes, L-I-N-E-R. They're designed to draw straight lines, and they have long, soft hairs. And if you get paint that's wet, they'll very easily splatter. And I'm just hitting it against my finger like that, and it's popping off the end of the brush. But it's got to be wet paint, otherwise it won't do that. But I could go through and add color in here. No reason I couldn't. Yellow where there's yellow, and red. I might want to, I also at times will take a rag and just soften edges somewhere just to make it look more, not like it's a cutout. Anyways, you can play with this thing, but it isn't 100% opaque paint. I actually have an opaque paint that I use, and it's called Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. This, you can find it online and on any art store, and it's white. So when this dries, if I want that to be really white instead of a yellowy white, I'll use this stuff because it doesn't dry. These things dry kind of semi-transparent. I have here. I think I do. Yeah. Okay. One of the things I wanted to show you is you should always view your artwork with a mat, because when you see this art, you're looking at it with the masking tape on it. And if you want to see how it really looks as a piece of art, you need a mat. Look what happens if I do this to this artwork. See the difference that makes? I'll do the same thing to this one and show you. When you see this and you see all the tape and all the things around it, look at what happens when you quiet it all down with a mat. And it looks like a real picture. So it's nice to keep mats around the size of the art you're doing, so you can kind of check your own artwork. And the other thing that I tend to do is I tend to take my art to a certain point and then I'll sleep on it, and I'll wake up in the morning. First of all, the color will change by tomorrow, because the drier the paint gets, the lighter it gets. So I like to let it dry overnight, take another look and see if there's anything I can do to enhance it. I tend to like the trunks on this one better than this one, but we'll see. I think this one just needs more of a white, a better white color there to enhance it a little bit. Looks a little bit muddy. Anyways, what questions are you guys running into? What questions do you have? Anybody?
What do you
So-
do if you got the dark stuff in the wrong place?
In the wrong place over here? There is, I mean,
Meaning
there's really
where
no,
you should have had, where it should have been lighter. What happens if you end up getting it darker where it should have been lighter?
you can go back in with a white paint like I did on these trunks. So there is an option to fix it. Always an option to go back in with a white and paint over the dark. There's also an option, I'm not sure if everybody knows about this product, but I will show you, and I will show you how it works. This is in almost every grocery store. Mr. Clean Magic Eraser, original. Let me show you what this thing can do. If I take a piece of this right here and dip it in water, clean water. Let's say I wanted to change this dark that's around the peach. I can just erase it from my paper. If I had a paper towel, which I don't, I could blot it. I guess I do right there. And almost start again. I have taken paintings, you know, if you have like a chunk of this green going in the wrong place, let's say you didn't want this end, you can just get rid of it.
That's a great tip.
Yeah, I mean, this stuff is really invaluable, and it's, when that dries, you can just kind of repaint. So if I saw part of this that I wanted to fix, I could take it, erase it, and then just paint back around it. So if there's dark in the light spot or light in the dark spot, I've got a little bit of leeway here. Or if I want to add some lighter spots to this picture, you know, it's kind of where it is now, but if I wanted to lighten up a certain part, you see the difference?
You get highlights.
Yes. So you can go back in and do that kind of stuff. Same thing here, I could.
What's it called again?
It's called Mr. Clean Magic Eraser Original. There's a couple different, some of them are, they've done, like upgraded or updated, but the original Mr. Clean Eraser comes in a big square like this. And I pull it out and tear off little pieces and use little pieces when I want to do cleanups and fixes. And I've literally pulled a barn out of the middle of a watercolor, let it dry, and then go back and paint trees around it and not know that there was a barn underneath there. So it's really a interesting watercolor helper. So that's what I would do if I put a color in the wrong spot, a light and a dark or a dark and a light. You can try to pull it out and then just go back in and paint after it dries. You can't paint on it right away because it's wet. And if you start to paint, it'll kind of bleed in with everything. But if you let it dry and go back, you can fix almost any problem that you encounter.
I have a friend who was on the team who developed that.
Oh, really?
He lives in France. It was, they called it Monsieur Propa. So. Yeah.
Well, it's
a cool thing.
Not only is it wonderful for watercolor, but it's one of those things that I didn't know if, when you have scuffs on your wall and scuffs on your baseboards, oh my gosh, this thing will just take the scuff right off and it doesn't hurt the paint at all. It's amazing stuff. It really is. So as we're talking, I see something I can do to enhance this picture, and I'm already.
So one of the questions that I have on looking at my background that I have is whether it's dark enough to fill in, to have it light in front, or I'm just not sure which way to go. So how do you figure that out, or can you?
Well, what you have to remember in your head is if you have trees with trunks, the trunks are the opposite color of what you're putting. So that's that's why when I painted, I kind of knew what I was going to put. The dark always goes around a lighter color and the light goes around a darker color. So that's kind of why I did too. I could have said to you, if you do lighter colors, you really need to do dark backgrounds. If you do darker colors, then you need to do light backgrounds. And that's because you're going to run into that point if you do dark art and try to cover with dark, it's dark on dark. So it's not going to work so good. There's another way to do this that I didn't do tonight because it's a little bit more experimentative, is you put so much paint that it drips and you let the drips become your trunks.
Mhm.
And if you do it right, it can be beautiful because drips, you just can't make a line that looks like a drip. And if you get a lot of drips in there, they can look really spectacular. So just keep in mind that if you look at your painting and it's dark in the dark areas, then you'd probably want to go around it with a light. If your painting is in the lighter values, then you probably get away with going over in a dark. Does that make sense?
Yeah, is there an option to show you our background and you can give us a comment?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you're at a good point for me stopping here, I'd be happy to go back in and share with each of us so you could put it on your camera or just put it up in front of your screen.
Mhm.
Would you like to do that? I'm gonna
would.
stop sharing here. I'm gonna go here and ask that anybody that's interested. Now, Judy, could you, let's see if, do you have a share screen?
Yeah, sure.
Hit share screen and then
Okay,
put that in
but-
front and you,
Except that the way they did it, only the host can share in this meeting unless you can go.
okay. So then just put it up in front. We can all see it there. You know what I might do? Excuse me. I'm going to shift into the view. If I go into speaker view, if you hold it up and speak, you now are large.
Yep, I can do
Yep.
that. I can definitely do that.
Yeah.
So those are pretty vibrant colors.
Yeah. But that's going to work that would work either way. I think it probably work better if you put a dark background myself.
Okay.
Because they're bright, but they're not necessarily dark.
Mhm.
Even the blues are bright. So I think the concept is dark with bright colors, not necessarily dark colors. And those are bright as opposed to.
And then here's
Yeah.
another question. There's always the possibility of turning it up.
Yeah, you have to decide on your own which is up and which is down. If you did it that way, you're going to have the bright colors on your trunks and the lighter colors on top. So I think if you're going to, usually you see more in the tops of the trees, I would turn around, put the bright colors on the treetops and the
Okay.
colors down below as the trunks. That would be my choice.
Okay,
Good job.
I'm gonna try it.
Okay, well,
Len's got
I was
something.
doing mine and all of a sudden I realized that I wasn't doing trees anymore. It came into some kind of a herd animal. I don't know what it is.
I was going to say, it looks like a herd of cows or sheep. That's really nice, Len. I like that. Sometimes accidents happen. Anybody else want to share something?
Can I show
Oh,
you? Well, first, I want to just show you the little trees that.
Very nice, very nice.
And then, my trunks are not, they don't pop like yours, but I'll try it
No,
again.
but the idea is there, and it should be, the point is it should be fluid and loose. And remember, in tree trunks, if they're not the same shape, they're narrower at the top and they get wider at the bottom. If it goes the opposite way, it's not looking as much like a trunk. Those are
Right,
minor
it's
little
like-
things.
I know I have some ice cream cones.
Yes, I was going to say those miniature ice cream cones. Nice job, nice job. Who else? Terry, you've got some up there.
Yeah, they're all it's all dark. And I have these too. I just can't seem to get.
Those are all nice trees.
The-
Wonderful. Wonderful.
The light and the dark.
Well, it
I
takes
just
practice.
added this yellow and white.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just added this yellow and white here.
Lift it up. Let's see. I can't see it.
There.
Oh yeah, that works. That
On
works.
all the way up.
Yeah. The
it
trick
was too
with
dark.
watercolors is you have to think of those things when you start. The things that are lighter, you have to make sure you don't put darks on them by mistake. When you paint in acrylics and oils, it doesn't make any difference. You can go back. But with watercolors, you have to turn your thinking upside down and say, where are the lights? I put those down first and then I work around them so they stay light. And that's a hard thing to do, especially since you're competing with people that have painted in oils, and acrylics have learned the other way, which is don't worry about it because you can always put light on top of dark and dark on top of light. Watercolor is a little bit different. It's kind of a flip-flop theory. Good job. Anybody else? No? Well, let me tell you, before we leave, Let me give you a little idea of what we do in the art class, because it's similar to this, but a little different. What I normally do is my goal is to have people learn how to enjoy painting watercolors. I'm not trying to sell a style. I'm not trying to get people to paint like me. I would like to open people's eyes as to what they can do in their own style. But I want people to be able to paint and not have to learn how to draw. And I'm a big proponent of drawing, but my class, I send out via mail a photograph and a line drawing so that you don't have to redraw anything. All you have to do is get that drawing onto your paper. And you can do that by printing it out and putting it on a window and tracing it, or you can decide to draw it yourself. It doesn't matter to me. But I want people to learn to paint in my class and not struggle. If it's because we've done some, even beginner painters have done some very complex paintings and not have to worry about drawing them. And that's half the battle. So you get a painting and you get a drawing. And in many cases, I give you a color version and black and white, because black and white tells you what the values are. Color is kind of hard for everybody to know. Is the red a darker value than that blue? It's hard to tell until you make a black and white. Then you know right away, because blacks and grays and whites are very clear what's dark and what's light. So you get 3 files, and then we sit down and I paint that same image, and everybody watches me paint and asks questions like you did tonight. And at the end of the session, if people are done, then we share. In some cases, they share them with me during the week, because in an hour, it's an hour and a half class. You're not always able to finish a full painting. I can sometimes do it, but I'm usually not done on Monday. I'm not usually done till Wednesday or Thursday. And then the next week, we usually start off by showing all the finished pieces, everybody taking a look at them, and then we start on to the next image. And the images will jump around from landscapes to seascapes to animals to still lifes, portraits, anything. We just paint whatever. Sometimes I'll take input from people. Sometimes people send me pictures that they've taken, and we'll use those. But it's kind of learning to paint watercolor and get it in exposure to different types of genres, different types of content. And that's always real helpful, because I'm not stuck on one thing. I'm not a landscape painter or a seascape painter. I'm still at the point where I like to paint, just paint, period. And it doesn't matter what it is. So, and like I said, the classes go on. It's a 1.5 hour class, 1 day a week, 5 to 6:30. And it's what, 8 people about. It's, and it doesn't matter online how many people there are, because all I'm doing is painting and talking, and people are asking questions. So, except their pictures get smaller as the number of people increase. Oh, that's true. Yeah, what you see. But we do laugh a lot, and that's good. It's a fun. Again, my goal is to get people to like painting. That's the key. Len could tell you, he's taken lessons. He's taken classes from me for a couple of years, and I can see progression in his painting, and even in his questions, he's starting to think like an artist. That's very different than beginners who are just learning. I mean, painting takes practice. There's no way you can read it and understand it without getting your fingers wet and paint. And if you got a problem, the best thing to do is paint. If you ask a question, I'm still going to tell you, paint. You paint and you paint and you paint, and there's no way you will not get better and better and better. It just can't happen. But it's got to be fun too. Go ahead.
So first of all, thank you. It's been fabulous. I've learned so much in this little 2-hour session. And I'm just curious, 2 questions. When will your next painting class start? And the second question is, do you ever do plein air painting?
Yeah, interesting question. So next class, Maya and I are still working on that. I asked her to hold off until February, just because I painted, the last class was like an 18-week class, and I did 2 classes a week for months. So I said, I really need a break just to paint on my own. So we'll be starting up sometime in February, very likely the first Monday of February, but we haven't confirmed. Secondly, in the last 6 months, Maya has asked me to ask each class, do you want to return to the building on-site painting versus staying at home? And the consensus has been almost 100%. People like staying at home for a lot of reasons, but one of them is dragging equipment to a place, unloading it, painting, and going back once a week is just awkward for everyone. But what came up, the reason I'm mentioning this is what came up in the last talk was somebody said maybe we could do a hybrid where, once or twice during this 6-week period, we do a plein air, because that's outside. It's not, the problem with the JCC is that their art rooms are very small. So if you get more than 6 people, it's crowded and you have to, bring your water in and such. So we were thinking maybe if people wanted to do that, we would just opt to take one of the, and maybe, we'll work on a weekend or something that people could go to, find a park, go to the sauna or something and just sit down and paint. Yeah.
So I
So
just want to give you
that's an
some
option.
feedback too. Having it online, the advantages, we are all seeing your page close up. Where I've been in an art class before, and unless you're in that front row, you can hardly see what the teacher's painting. So it's been fabulous being on Zoom and seeing it so close.
Yeah, that's good. And I realized during a class that we taught at the facility, I brought in a couple of still lifes once, and that didn't work because the class size is set and the tables are set. So no matter where you put it, somebody's looking at the side or the back and somebody's looking at the front. It was not a good experience. So I thought it worked much better to bring in the art to people already drawn. And again, I'm a big proponent of drawing, but I don't want to tie people's hands. If it's drawn and you don't have to worry about that, then I think you can worry about painting, and that's my concern. So yeah, that's a good point. And the other thing I think one of the pros of being in person is I like to watch people paint, because I might catch something in the beginning of their painting and not have to see it at the end and say, oh, you should have done this. I might be able to say, ooh, because when I did paint, I would do a demo and then they paint and I would walk around the room and watch people paint. And then I could have a question, mixing paint, I'm having trouble, or this color, I'm having trouble. It was instant and I could see what everyone does. Here, I'm really just looking at your finished piece. I'm not seeing how you're doing it and what you're doing. And so it's a tough one. It's a tough one. But, today, the way things are going today, I still think, it's a more cautious approach to do Zoom right now still, but
100%.
plein air, I think plein air would be a really nice, fun thing to do.
Maybe that's the last class.
Yeah. Anybody else? Well, we got real close to 2 hours. This worked out perfect. I hope I wasn't going too fast for anybody.
It was fine. And thank you very much, John, for offering this, because the nice thing about this was this is like the parts to the whole. So you showed us some parts and then how to use it. And sometimes looking at a big picture is kind of daunting. You go, oh, wow, where do I even start? So this was fun.
Yeah. Oh, and you think about it, if you did a study on trees and a study on water and a study on mountains, then when you go outside and look at things, it's like, here's all the parts. Yeah. Good point. Good point. Anybody else? Any comments?
Just thank you very much. It was
enjoyed it.
wonderful, really good.
Yeah,
Great,
I loved it.
Great. Wonderful. That's what I want to hear. I want you to be excited about painting. And like I said before, if you've painted or drawn, you're an artist. There's no requirement to being an artist other than doing art. So I hope you'll all look into the next class if it comes out, when it comes out. Thank you all for showing up tonight. I really appreciate it. And have a good rest of the month.
Okay. And one other question. I'm not a member of the Los Gatos JCC. But I got this because I'm a member of the JCC at Palo Alto. So
Yep.
will I be on the mailing list to get the
Sure,
information?
just let Maya know that the
Oh.
gal who you signed up with.
Okay.
I think you're on the list now. So once you've
All right.
taken one of my classes, she has an ongoing list of people who've
Okay.
taken classes. We don't care not only where you are. Some of the people that signed into this class are in Washington State, and some have been in Santa Barbara. People take vacation and zoom into the class and take it. So not a
Okay.
problem.
All right, great, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all for showing up.
Okay,
I
thank
hope
you.
to see you all again in the future. Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.